Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just dipping our toes into the vast ocean of philosophy, no.
Hey, hard.
We are preparing for a truly epic voyage. We're launching into one of the most profoundly influential and, let's be honest, pretty mind-bending texts ever written. Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason.
A monster of a book.
Yeah.
But incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this. Kant himself, right? He described this predicament, this fate of human reason. He said it's burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss.
Because they come from reason itself.
Exactly. Given by its very nature, but which it also cannot answer. Because they transcend every capacity of human reason.
Imagine that bind. Your own mind forces you to ask, but prevents you from answering.
It's intense. And this, he said, creates the battlefield of metaphysics, just this endless war zone of arguments no one can seem to win.
Yeah, a constant clash of ideas.
He even gave us this image, this metaphor of reason as a lonely island of truth, surrounded by a broad and stormy ocean, the true seat of illusion. It really paints a picture, doesn't it? The danger of going too far.
It certainly does. The allure of speculation, but the risk of getting lost.
So today, for you, our dedicated listener, our mission is clear. We need to chart a course through this dense, revolutionary work. We're going to try and extract the most important philosophical nuggets, the real game-changing insights.
Focusing on the core themes, the big ideas.
Exactly, diving deep into the underlying philosophy that just fundamentally reshaped Western thought. So get ready, because this is a deep dive into the very architecture of how you experience and understand reality.
What's fascinating here is, well, it wasn't just that Kant wanted to solve a few specific philosophical problems. His ambition was much, much grander than that.
Right, it was foundational.
Totally. He sought to define the very capacity and maybe more importantly, the limits of human reason itself. He looked at fields like math, physics.
Which were making real progress.
Undeniable progress. And he asked, why can't metaphysics, this supposedly ultimate study of reality, why can't it achieve the same kind of certainty? Why is it always stuck in this battlefield?
Good question.
So he aimed to transform it, to take it from what he called mere groping among concepts.
Just fumbling around?
Yeah, fumbling in the dark, and turn it into a secure path of science. But here's the key point. This wasn't about him creating yet another system of metaphysics, another grand theory of everything. No. It was a treatise on its method. It was about mapping the boundaries of human knowledge first. Understand the tool before you try to build the universe with it.
Ah, okay. So examine reason itself.
Precisely. Expose the intricate internal structure of our own cognitive faculties. It's this incredible critical self-examination of reason done by reason for reason, like your mind writing its own instruction manual.
An instruction manual for your own mind. I like that. That's a powerful way to frame it. An incredibly ambitious starting point. So, okay, let's roll up our sleeves then and dive straight into Kant's foundational distinctions. Because before we can even touch what we can know,
Right.
Kant makes us hit pause.
Right.
He forces us to consider something more basic. How do we know things? Like, at all? What are the actual building blocks of our understanding, and where do they even come from?
It's the essential first step. You can't skip it. And Kant begins with an observation that seems, almost obvious, right? He says, all our cognition begins with experience.
Seems straightforward enough. You see something, you hear something.
Exactly. Your senses get stimulated by the world's, the warmth of your coffee mug, the sound of my voice right now, and your understanding kicks in. It processes these impressions, compares them, connects them, separates them out.
And builds experience.
Right. And eventually forms what we call experience. So chronologically, if you're thinking about the timeline, no cognition actually precedes experience. It all starts when the world interacts with us.
Okay.
But, and this is where Kant introduces that crucial nuance, the subtle but really profound distinction. He says that even though all cognition begins with experience, it doesn't mean all knowledge arises out of experience.
Ah, okay. Begins with, but doesn't necessarily arise out of. What's the difference there?
That difference is everything. It leads us straight to differentiating between two fundamental types of cognition. First, you've got empirical cognition.
Makes sense, based on experience.
Exactly. As the name suggests, this is the knowledge we get directly from our experiences, from our senses. It tells us what is. So, your coffee mug is hot right now.
Okay. A fact about the world.
A specific fact. And this is the vital limitation of your sense. Empirical cognition can't tell us what must be. It can't tell you that your mug will always be hot or that all mugs must be hot under certain conditions.
It's just about this particular instance.
Precisely. It only offers specific contingent facts, things that happen to be true but could be otherwise. It's useful, obviously, but it doesn't give us those universal, absolutely necessary truths.
Okay, so that's empirical. What's the other kind?
The other kind is pure cognition. Kant also calls this a priori cognition.
A priori meaning from beforehand.
Exactly, before experience. This is knowledge that is entirely independent of any and all experience. Its defining characteristics, the flags to look for, are necessity and strict universality.
Necessity and universality, meaning it has to be true, and it's true everywhere, always.
That's it. It holds true not just sometimes or for some things we've observed, but always and for everything in its domain. Kant's favorite example, the one he comes back to, is the proposition, every alteration must have a cause.
Okay, cause and effect.
Right. Now, he argues this isn't something we learn just by watching lots of things happen and seeing causes followed by effects, like a scientist collecting data points.
Tallying them up.
Yeah. He argues that the very concept of cause itself inherently contains the idea of a necessary connection to an effect. It contains this strict universality. If we tried to derive this just from, say, frequent association or habit, like the philosopher David Hume famously argued.
Hume thought it was just habit, right? We see B follow A enough times, we expect it.
Exactly. But Kant says if it were just habit, then its necessity would completely vanish. It would just become a subjective expectation in our minds, not an objective, undeniable truth about how things must work. Kant is saying, nope, your mind already possesses this rule, this principle of causality, before any specific experience confirms it. It's built in.
Wow. So pure cognition isn't just about spotting patterns in the world. It's uncovering something much deeper, much stronger, these universally true and necessary principles that seem to structure reality itself.
Or at least structure our understanding of reality.
Right. Okay. Structure our understanding. This is where it gets really interesting for how we think about knowledge, isn't it? Because it leads us straight into how we actually form judgments about the world. We don't just passively receive facts, we actively judge them. But like you said, not all judgments are created equal.
Precisely. And this distinction Kant makes here is, it's one of his most fundamental and frankly most enduring contributions to philosophy. It's absolutely critical if you want to get a handle on his entire project. He classifies judgments into two main types, analytic judgments and synthetic judgments.
Analytic and synthetic, okay.
So an analytic judgment is, well, it's like unfolding a secret that was already tucked away inside a concept you already had. The predicate, the quality or characteristic you're attributing is already covertly contained within the subject concept itself.
Can you give an example?
The classic one is all bodies are extended.
Meaning all physical things take up space.
Right. The very definition, the very concept of a body implies that it takes up space, that it has extension. You literally cannot conceive of a body that isn't extended without contradicting the concept itself.
Okay, so the predicate extended is already part of the subject body.
Exactly. These are what Kant calls judgments of clarification. They don't actually introduce brand new information. They just make explicit what was already implicit in the concept. They're certain, absolutely, no question. But they don't expand your knowledge of the world. They're like clarifying a definition you already have stored away.
Okay, clear but not expanding knowledge. What about the other kind? Synthetic.
Right. Now, in stark contrast, synthetic judgments are the ones where the predicate lies entirely outside the concept of the subject, though to be sure it stands in connection with it.
So the predicate adds something new.
Totally new information. Consider Kant's example. All bodies are heavy.
Okay.
Now, the concept of body itself, just the idea of a physical thing taking up space, doesn't inherently contain the concept of heaviness or weight. You can easily imagine a body floating weightlessly in deep space, right? It's still a body, still extended, but without gravity acting on it, it wouldn't be heavy.
Ah, I see. So heavy isn't part of the definition of body.
Exactly. This judgment adds new information. It amplifies our cognition. It synthesizes two separate concepts, body and heavy, based on experience. And for you, the listener, this is incredibly relevant. Think about it. If all our knowledge were just analytic judgments.
We'd just be shuffling definitions around.
Precisely. We'd simply be unpacking concepts we already understood, never truly learning anything new about the world itself. Real progress in knowledge, the acquisition of genuine new insights, comes from these synthetic judgments. They actually expand our understanding. They connect concepts in novel ways.
Okay, so we need synthetic judgments to learn anything new. But earlier you mentioned pure a priori cognition, knowledge independent of experience. How does that fit with synthetic judgments, which seem to rely on connecting concepts learned through experience, like body and heavy?
Ah, now you've hit on it. This is the absolute core, the money question, as Kant himself basically called it. This is the truly groundbreaking move that sets Kant apart. The possibility, indeed the reality, of synthetic a priori judgments.
Okay, wait. Synthetic and a priori. How does that work? You just said synthetic adds new info, often from experience, and a priori means independent of experience. Seems like a contradiction.
It really does seem contradictory at first glance. How can something be genuinely new knowledge, ampliative, adding something not already in the concept, and also be universally necessary, holding true independently of any specific experience confirming it? That's the puzzle Kant sets out to solve.
So does he think they exist? Does he have examples?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He argues that mathematical judgments are a perfect example. Think about 7 plus 5 equals 12.
Okay, basic arithmetic.
Is the concept 12 somehow contained within the concept of 7 plus 5? Kant says no. Not in the same way that extension is contained in body. 7 is 7, 5 is 5, plus is the idea of combining them. To get to 12, you have to perform an operation, a mental synthesis. You have to go beyond the initial concepts and construct the result.
Okay. I kind of see that. It's not just looking inside 7 plus 5. I have to do the addition.
Exactly. Or take a geometric example. The sum of the interior angles of a plane triangle equals 2 right angles, or 180 degrees, is the idea of summing to 180 degrees contained within the mere concept of a triangle, 3 straight lines enclosing a space.
I guess not explicitly. I have to learn that or prove it.
Right. You have to construct it mentally or on paper. You draw the lines, you extend them, you use logical steps based on spatial intuition. It's synthetic. The predicate isn't just part of the definition of the subject, but is it based on experience? Did we measure thousands of triangles and find they usually add up to 180 degrees?
No, it feels more certain than that. It feels like it must be true for all plane triangles.
Exactly. It holds with necessity and strict universality. It's a priori. So mathematics, for Kant, is full of these synthetic a priori judgments.
Okay, so how are they possible then? If they're not just definitions and they're not from experience, where does the necessity and the new information come from?
This is where Kant points to the structure of our own minds. He explains how these synthetic a priori judgments are possible. They involve, in his words, constructing an object satisfying the first predicate in pure intuition.
Pure intuition. What's that?
We'll get into it more, but think of it as the mind's own inherent way of structuring sensations, specifically through space and time. We don't verify 7 plus 5 equals 12 by counting pebbles every time. We perform the operation in our minds using our intuitive grasp of succession, which relates to time. We don't prove the triangle theorem by measuring physical triangles. We do it through a mental construction relying on our a priori intuition of space.
So we're using these built-in mental frameworks, space and time, to construct these truths.
Precisely. This internal mental construction allows us to directly grasp the necessary connection between the subject and the predicate. Even though that predicate wasn't analytically contained within the subject, it's not knowledge derived directly from sense experience hitting us on the outside, but it's also not merely unpacking a definition. It's knowledge generated by the mind's own structuring activity.
Wow, okay. That's a huge insight. It really pulls back the curtain, doesn't it? It shows our minds aren't just passive receivers like a camera taking pictures.
Not at all. They are actively structuring, maybe even co-creating, the very possibility of our experience and certain kinds of knowledge. This synthetic a priori judgment is the key that unlocks Kant's whole system.
That's a truly profound shift in perspective, moving away from the mind as just a mirror reflecting reality. It utterly challenges that old idea that all knowledge either comes directly from experience or is just a logical reshuffling of concepts we already had. So if our minds are actively structuring reality, or at least our experience of it, what are these mental structures? You mentioned pure intuition, space, and time. What subjective conditions built right into us allow us to organize and understand the world in this specific, coherent way that makes things like math possible?
This brings us squarely into what Kant famously termed the transcendental aesthetic. Don't let the name aesthetic fool you. It's not about beauty here. It's from the Greek aesthesis, meaning sensation or perception.
Ah, okay, so it's about how we perceive things.
Exactly. This section investigates sensibility, which Kant defines as our capacity, our receptivity, to receive singular, immediate representations through our senses. He calls these immediate representations intuitions. You just intuit the redness of this apple or the specific shape of that chair. It's direct, singular perception.
Okay, sensibility gives us intuitions, raw data.
Kind of like the raw data, yes. But here, in the transcendental aesthetic, Kant delivers one of his most radical and, let's be honest, mind-bending ideas, that space and time are not objective realities existing out there independently of us.
Wait, space and time aren't real?
Not real in the sense of being things in themselves or properties of things in themselves, existing whether or not any mind perceives them. Instead, Kant argues they are subjective and ideal. They are the pure forms of our intuition.
Forms of intuition, like mental software.
That's a decent analogy. Think of them as the fundamental way our minds necessarily organize sensory input. Let's start with space. Kant argues that space isn't something we learn about from observing objects in the world. Quite the opposite.
We need space before we can observe objects.
Exactly. He argues it's something we presuppose in order to have any experience of external objects at all. Think about it for a moment. Before you can even perceive two distinct objects as being next to each other, or above or below, you already need the fundamental framework of nextness, aboveness, belowness, all of which are spatial relationships. They imply space.
Okay, I need the concept of next to see things as next to each other.
More than just the concept, the actual intuitive framework. Space, for Kant, is a pure intuition. It's pure because it's not derived from sensations themselves. It's the structure for sensations. And it's an intuition because it's singular. We don't experience lots of different separate spaces that we then somehow combine. We experience everything as being different parts of one single boundless space.
One underlying space for everything outside us.
Right. And crucially, it's a priori. It's not derived from sensations. Rather, it's the necessary form in which all our outer sensations are inevitably ordered. Geometry, again, provides a powerful illustration. When we prove theorems like two straight lines cannot enclose a space, we're not relying on measuring actual lines drawn on paper.
We're doing it in our heads, using the idea of lines in space.
Exactly. We're performing a construction in our a priori intuition of space itself. And the truth we arrive at holds with absolute necessity and universality, the kind that no amount of empirical observation just measuring things could ever provide. Experience can tell you that it is, but not that it must be.
Okay, so space is like the built-in grid for our outer senses.
That's a good way to put it. And Kant offers another fascinating, kind of surprising argument involving what he calls incongruent counterparts.
Incongruent counterparts.
Like your right and left hands.
Yeah.
Or right and left glove. Think about them. Geometrically, in terms of all their internal measurements, finger lengths, palm width, they are identical mirror images.
Yeah, they look the same, just flipped.
Exactly. But you cannot perfectly superimpose one onto the other in three-dimensional space. You can't fit your left hand perfectly into a right-handed glove, right?
Yeah.
They possess an inherent opposite-handedness or directionality.
True.
This difference, Kant argues, this fundamental spatial opposition, isn't something you grasp through concepts alone.
Yeah.
You grasp it directly through pure intuition of space. It reveals something about the structure of space itself that's not just conceptual. It's another compelling piece of his argument that space isn't just a passive empty container, but an active structuring form imposed by our own sensibility, a condition for experiencing things like hands and gloves.
Okay, that's pretty compelling. What about time? Is it the same kind of deal?
Very similar, yes. Time, for Kant, is also a pure intuition and a formal condition of inner intuition.
Inner intuition, like thoughts and feelings.
Precisely. Just as space provides the fundamental structure for our experience of outer objects, time provides the fundamental structure for our experience of our inner world, our thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, all occurring one after another in succession.
So everything in my mind happens in time.
Exactly. Like space, time is a necessary a priori condition for all appearances, both inner and outer, since even outer objects are perceived sequentially. You can, Kant says, imagine emptying time of all events, but you simply cannot imagine removing time itself from your experience. It's the inescapable rhythm, the underlying sequence of your entire conscious life.
Wow. Okay. So space structures the outside, time structures the inside, and both are forms we impose.
That's the core of it. And these radical ideas lead directly to Kant's famous doctrine of transcendental idealism. This is a truly pivotal aha moment for many listeners, so let's pause on it. It means that space and time, these fundamental structures of our experience, do not describe objective properties of the universe as it exists independently of us.
They're not features of the real world.
Not of the world as it is in itself. Instead, they characterize how things necessarily appear to us, what Kant calls phenomena. They describe the structure of the world as experienced by human minds. But they don't tell us about how things actually are in themselves, independent of our minds, what he calls noumena.
Phenomena are appearances. Noumena are things in themselves.
Exactly. So your mind isn't just passively recording reality like a camera. It's actively structuring it, shaping it into the specific spatiotemporal framework within which you experience the world. It's like, imagine you were born wearing irremovable rose-tinted glasses. Everything you see appears rosy.
Right.
Does that mean the world itself is rosy? Not necessarily. The rosiness is a contribution of the glass as the form of your vision. Similarly, space and time are the glasses of our sensibility.
So this doesn't mean objects outside us don't exist.
No, absolutely not. And Kant is very clear on this later. It just fundamentally redefines the nature of our knowledge of them. We only know them as they appear to us through these forms. It's a crucial limit, but also what makes objective knowledge within experience possible.
Wow, okay. That's genuinely mind-bending. Our minds aren't just observing reality, they're providing the stage, the lighting, the very dimensions for the play of reality as we experience it. That's a huge idea. But the transcendental aesthetic, you said, was about sensibility, how we perceive things, how sensations get structured. What about how we think about them? How do our minds move beyond just this raw, structured sensory data to form coherent concepts and judgments about objects? What does this all mean for how we actually think about the objects we experience in space and time?
Exactly. That's the next crucial step. After the transcendental aesthetic, which explored sensibility in its forms, space and time, we transition to the transcendental analytic. This massive section of the critique delves into the understanding which Kant sees as our faculty for forming abstract general representations or concepts and the rules that govern their use.
So sensibility gives us intuitions, understanding gives us concepts.
Precisely. Sensibility is receptive. It gives us that thing is there. Understanding is active, spontaneous. It gives us the what that thing is. It thinks, it judges, it applies rules. While sensibility gives us the raw, though already structured data, the intuition's understanding provides us with the concepts, the labels, the ways of organizing and making sense of that data. Table, cause, substance, unity, these are concepts.
And just like space and time, we're a priori forms of intuition.
You're anticipating it perfectly. Just as space and time are the a priori forms of intuition, Kant argues there are also a priori concepts of the understanding. These are the fundamental conceptual tools the mind uses before any specific experience, and they structure how we think about any object whatsoever. He calls these pure concepts the categories.
The categories. Okay, so these are like the basic software for thinking.
That's a great analogy again. Think of them as the fundamental built-in conceptual structures your mind uses to synthesize and organize those raw perceptions, already structured by space and time, into coherent thoughts about objects. They are the rules for thinking objects.
What are some examples?
Kant derives them systematically from the logical functions of judgment, basically, the different ways we can logically structure a proposition. They include really foundational ideas like unity, plurality, totality under quantity, reality, negation, limitation under quality, substance and accident, causality and dependence, community, reciprocity under relation, and possibility, impossibility, existence, non-existence, necessity, contingency under modality.
Wow, that's quite a list. 12 of them.
12 main ones grouped into 4 sets of 3. And Kant meticulously argues that these categories are elementary, they're universal, all rational minds use them, and collectively they exhaust the entire field of pure understanding. It's not just a random list he came up with.
He thinks that's all the basic ways we can structure thought about objects?
All the pure a priori ways, yes. He derives them from the table of logical judgments, arguing there's a direct correspondence. And what's particularly ingenious is how he shows the internal structure he claims the third category always arises from a combination of the first 2 in its class.
How does that work?
For example, under quantity, you have unity, one, and plurality, many. Combine them and you get totality, allness, unity of the plurality. Under quality, you have reality, something is, and negation, something is not. Combine them and you get limitation. Something is only partially, it's reality limited by negation. It shows it's not just a list. It's a deeply structured, interconnected system revealing how your understanding necessarily operates.
Okay, that's intricate. But here's a puzzle that comes to my mind. These categories sound very abstract, very purely logical, unity, causality, substance. How do these purely intellectual concepts actually connect with our sensory experience, which is always concrete, specific, and happening in time and space? How does the abstract concept of causality, for instance, get applied to specific events I see happening one after another in time? There seems to be a gap.
You've hit on another crucial Kantian problem, and he provides a notoriously difficult but essential solution in a section called the schematism. You're right, there's a gap between the pure non-sensory categories, concepts of the understanding, and the sensory intuitions, structured by space and time. How do we bridge it? How does the understanding apply its pure concepts to appearances?
Yeah, how do they meet?
The schemata are the answer. Kant describes schematism as the process by which the logical content of categories is transformed into a content applicable to the data of our senses. Think of the schemata as mediating representations, like translation rules, that connect the purely intellectual category to the conditions of time, since time is the form of all intuition, inner and outer.
So the schemata involve time.
Yes, critically. Kant calls a schema an a priori time determination in accordance with rules. Each category gets a specific temporal schema. For example, the category of substance gets the schema of permanence of the real in time. We experience substance as that which persists through changes over time. The category of causality gets the schema of succession of the manifold insofar as it is subject to a rule, specifically, necessary succession in time. We experience cause and effect as event B necessarily following event A in time, according to a rule. The category of community reciprocity gets the schema of simultaneity, according to a rule, of the determinations of one substance with those of another. We experience interacting things as existing at the same time and mutually influencing each other.
Okay. So the schema translates the abstract category into a rule about how things must be ordered in time. It makes the category applicable to our actual temporal experience.
Exactly. It's the mind's hidden art, the secret translator, allowing the understanding to apply its pure concepts to the sensory world and thus produce objective judgments about experience. Without the schemata, the categories would be empty logical forms, unable to grip onto reality.
This really deepens the picture of the mind actively constructing knowledge. So we have space and time structuring sensation, and then categories mediated by these time-based schemata structuring how we think about those sensations.
Precisely. And this powerful distinction, this whole apparatus, brings us back with renewed force to phenomena and noumena, revisited, because now Kant can state his conclusion even more strongly. The categories, applied via their schemata, have a determinate objective knowledge-producing use only when they are applied to spatiotemporal data, to appearances, to phenomena.
Only when applied to things as they appear to us.
Correct. They provide us with genuine knowledge only when they synthesize what is given to us in intuition, which is always in space and time. Consequently, things as they are in themselves, noumena, things considered apart from our sensibility and understanding, well, they can be thought by means of categories.
Meaning we can apply concepts like substance or cause to them in theory?
Yes, we can think them that way in the abstract, but they cannot be known, because knowledge, for Kant, requires both concepts and intuitions. And we have no intuition of things in themselves. We only have intuition of phenomena.
So no sensory data, no knowledge.
Essentially, yes. No possible experience means no possible knowledge. We can speak of noumena only in a negative sense, meaning we can define them negatively as things that are not objects of our senses, things independent of how they appear to us.
Yeah.
But we cannot speak of them in a positive sense as things we can actually characterize or know through pure reason alone.
That is a fundamental bedrock conclusion of the critique, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the culmination of the analytic. We gain objective knowledge only by applying our innate conceptual structures, the categories via schemata, to sensory data that has been organized by our innate forms of intuition, space and time. Knowledge is the result of this synthesis, confined to the realm of possible experience, the phenomenal world.
That's a massive, almost breathtaking implication. We can think about things beyond our experience, God, freedom, the soul, perhaps, but we can't truly know them, not in a scientific, theoretical sense. It's like reaching the edge of a map, the boundary of the knowable. But this raises a huge historical challenge, doesn't it? One that Kant clearly felt he needed to tackle head on. If our experience is so fundamentally shaped by us, by our minds, how does his system avoid the charge that it just reduces everything to subjective thoughts? How does it avoid collapsing into the kind of idealism where the external world is just all in our heads, like Bishop Berkeley seemed to suggest?
That's an absolutely critical question. And you're right, Kant was acutely aware of this potential misunderstanding and dedicated significant effort to answering it, especially because his view was called idealism. In the second edition of the Critique, he actually inserted a crucial, distinct argument specifically titled The Refutation of Idealism.
To defend against that charge directly.
It confronts the notion which he associated with Descartes, problematic idealism, and Berkeley, dogmatic idealism, that the existence of external objects might be doubtful or even denied, reducing them to mere subjective representations. Kant argues, with really ingenious subtlety, that our very self-consciousness, our awareness of our own existence as a single unified self enduring and changing in time, this inner experience itself presupposes the existence of an external world of objects.
Wait, my inner awareness proves the outer world. How?
His argument is complex, but the gist is this. To be aware of myself as existing in time, and specifically to be aware of the changes and duration of my own states, I need a reference point, something permanent outside of my own fleeting thoughts and sensations, against which that change and duration can be determined. Mere fleeting representations in my own mind aren't stable enough to ground my consciousness of my own temporal existence.
So I need something stable out there to know I'm changing in here.
That's the core idea. He argues that this necessary permanent something cannot be an intuition within me, since all my inner states are fleeting. Therefore, the consciousness of my own existence is necessarily bound up with the consciousness of the existence of objects outside me in space. These objects must be distinct from myself, represented as spatially outside me, and conceived to exist independently of my subjective perceptions at any given moment.
Wow. So transcendental idealism doesn't deny the external world exists.
Absolutely not. While Kant's transcendental idealism insists on the subjectivity of space and time as the forms of our intuition, the way things necessarily appear to us, it does so, as he explicitly states in the Refutation, without denying the real existence of the objects distinct from ourselves that are represented as being in space and time. He's not saying the tree outside your window isn't real.
He's saying the way I experience it as a distinct object occupying space and enduring through time is fundamentally shaped by my mind's structure.
Precisely. It's a crucial distinction. It separates his transcendental idealism about the forms of knowing from earlier forms of empirical or subjective idealism about the existence of objects. Kant's view actually secures the reality of the empirical world for us, grounding it in the conditions of our own self-consciousness, even while it strictly limits our theoretical knowledge to phenomena, to how things appear within those structures. It's about grounding empirical reality, not dissolving it into some kind of dream.
Okay, that's an ingenious clarification. It's not denying reality. It's just giving a really deep explanation of the intricate mind-dependent process through which we access and structure it. So we've journeyed through sensibility, providing intuitions structured by space and time, and understanding supplying concepts, the categories applied via schemata to make judgments about those intuitions. But what's the engine driving all this? What's the underlying unifying force that brings all these intricate processes together? What stitches all these disparate elements, sensations, concepts, time, space into a single coherent experience for a single coherent me? There must be something holding it all together.
There absolutely must be. And that unifying force, the linchpin of the entire cognitive apparatus, is what Kant calls the supreme principle of understanding, the transcendental unity of apperception.
Apperception, like perception.
Related, but distinct and more fundamental. Apperception here means self-consciousness, the mind's awareness of itself as the subject of its experiences. The transcendental unity of apperception is a truly profound and central concept. You could argue it's the keystone holding up Kant's entire cognitive architecture.
Okay, so what does it do?
Kant states, and yeah, it's a bit dense, but let's unpack it. The original and necessary consciousness of the identity of oneself is at the same time a consciousness of an equally necessary unity of the synthesis of all appearances in accordance with concepts.
Whoa. Okay, break that down. Consciousness of my own identity.
Right, the awareness that I am the same, I experiencing this now as experienced that a moment ago.
Is also consciousness of the unity of putting together appearances using concepts.
Exactly. In simpler terms, for you to experience something as a unified object, say, recognizing this whole thing as a coffee mug, not just a random collection of brown colored patches, curved lines, a feeling of warmth, and crucially, for you to be aware of yourself as the single consistent subject having this experience. There must be a fundamental unity of consciousness underlying it all. This is the famous I think that Kant insists must be able potentially to accompany all my representations, all my thoughts and perceptions.
The I think has to be attachable to everything I experience.
Yes, it's not necessarily that you're actively thinking, I think this is a mug every second, but the possibility of recognizing all these different perceptions and thoughts as mine, as belonging to one unified consciousness, is the essential condition. It's the constant underlying awareness of your own identity through time that makes all knowledge, all coherent experience possible.
What happens without it?
Without this foundational unity, Kant says, our sensory data would just be, well, he calls it a rhapsody of perceptions or a blind play of representations, just a chaotic, arbitrary jumble of sights, sounds, textures, less even than a dream, because there'd be no single dreamer holding it together. It wouldn't constitute a unified, coherent experience of an object attributed to a self.
Can you give an example?
He uses the act of counting. Imagine trying to count, say, apples. 1, 2, 3. If, as you perceive the third apple, you completely forget having perceived the first and second, and forget that it was you who perceived them.
You could never reach the total 3.
Exactly. No total number, no concept of 3 apples could ever arise. The act of retaining the previous representations, synthesizing them, and critically recognizing that it's the same conscious you doing the counting and holding them together, that consistent self that is the transcendental unity of our perception at work.
So it's not really a thing like the soul, but more like a function, a necessary condition.
Precisely. This consciousness of self, this I think, isn't an intuition. We don't see the self directly, nor is it one of the categories itself. It's the supreme condition for all cognition that relies on concepts, the condition for applying the categories to intuitions to form judgments about objects. It is what makes objective reality possible for our cognitions, ensuring that our thoughts and experiences actually relate to a shared, coherent object in the world, and not just to a private, subjective stream of unconnected representations flickering in our own minds. It's the invisible thread that strings the beads of experience together, making it your experience of a world. It's the glue.
The glue that holds your world and yourself together. That's a really powerful image.
Okay, the transcendental unity of apperception really does seem to tie everything together, explaining how we get a coherent world and a coherent self experiencing it. It feels like the master key unlocking our conscious experience. But Kant dedicated a huge chunk of the critique, the whole second half almost, to showing how reason can go spectacularly wrong. So after establishing these careful limits on what we can know, confining knowledge to phenomena structured by sensibility, and understanding what happens when reason inevitably tries to go beyond these boundaries, what happens when it tries to grasp things in themselves, things for which we have no intuition, like the soul, the universe as a whole, or God?
This is exactly where we plunge headfirst into the turbulent waters of the transcendental dialectic. And turbulent is the right word because this is where reason, according to Kant, generates its most profound and persistent illusions. He fully acknowledges that human reason has a natural propensity to overstep all these boundaries. It's not just a mistake we sometimes make, it's built into reason's nature. Why? Why does reason naturally do this?
Because reason, by its very nature, always seeks the unconditioned. The understanding deals with conditioned knowledge. This event is caused by that prior event. This substance has these properties. But reason pushes further back, always asking why. It wants the ultimate explanation, the complete series of conditions, the absolute ground for everything. It's driven by a demand for absolute totality and completeness.
It wants the final answer.
The final answer, exactly. And in this relentless quest, it's inevitably drawn to form ideas about grand totalities that, by their very nature, fall outside the bounds of any possible experience. Ideas like the soul as a unified, enduring self, the world as a complete whole, beginning or not, finite or not, and God as the ultimate unconditioned ground of all reality.
These are the big metaphysical questions.
The biggest. But because these ideas reach beyond any possible intuition, any possible experience that could confirm or deny them, applying the categories of the understanding to them doesn't yield knowledge. Instead, it generates what Kant calls transcendental illusion. The dialectic, then, isn't some guidebook on how to create these illusions dogmatically. It's a critique of this dialectical illusion, exposing how it arises inevitably from reason's hyperphysical use, its attempt to gain knowledge of non-empirical objects through pure understanding alone. Reason basically generates these grand concepts, these transcendental ideas that have no corresponding intuition to fill them out, and therefore, by Kant's own criteria established in the analytic, they cannot yield actual knowledge. They remain empty, though perhaps compelling thoughts.
Okay, so the dialectic is like a warning section. Danger zone. reason operating beyond experience. How does he break down these errors?
He meticulously dissects these inherent errors, these natural illusions of reason, into three main categories, corresponding to the three main objects of traditional metaphysics. First, we encounter the paralogisms of pure reason, which deal with the illusions surrounding rational psychology, the attempt to gain knowledge about the nature of the soul through reason alone.
Paralogisms, meaning faulty arguments.
Exactly. Faulty syllogisms, flawed inferences. Here, Kant diagnoses the fallacious reasoning that traditional metaphysics often employs regarding the nature of the soul or the self. Philosophers would frequently observe the purely formal features of the I think, the fact that the I in I think is always the subject, appears simple, not divisible, seems identical through time, and distinct from objects, and then mistakenly jump to conclusions about the soul itself as an underlying reality.
So from I think, therefore I am the subject, they'd conclude.
They conclude that the soul is a substance, an independently existing thing. From the simplicity of the I representation, they infer the soul as a simple substance, and therefore perhaps indestructible. From the identity of the I across different thoughts, they'd infer the soul is a personally identical substance enduring through time. And from the distinction between the I and outer objects, they'd infer the soul is distinct from the body and perhaps capable of existing separately, immortal.
Those sound like classic arguments for the soul's nature. What's wrong with them?
The error, Kant argues, is moving illicitly from the purely logical features of the representation of the self, the I think, which is just the formal condition of thought, to conclusions about the nature of the underlying reality or object, the soul, supposedly corresponding to that representation. The unity and simplicity of the I think are merely logical requirements for having coherent thoughts. They tell us nothing definitive about whether there's an actual, simple, enduring substance called the soul existing as an object underneath. We have no intuition, no experience of such a substance.
So the I of thought isn't the same as the soul as a thing.
Precisely. The I is just a point of view, the logical subject, not an object we can examine. Kant even directly critiques specific arguments of his time, like one by the philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, who argued that a simple being, like the soul was assumed to be, couldn't cease to exist gradually, by parts diminishing because it has no parts. Therefore, it must be permanent.
Seems logical. If it's simple, it can't break down.
Kant cleverly counters this by pointing out that even consciousness itself, though perhaps simple in its logical form, clearly has an intensive magnitude. It has degrees. Consciousness can fade, diminish, approach zero like the dimming of a light. So even if the soul were simple, its reality, its degree of consciousness, could potentially diminish to nothing, a kind of languescence or fading away without requiring it to break into parts. Therefore, simplicity doesn't automatically guarantee permanence or indestructibility.
Ah, neat counter. So what's the final verdict on knowing the soul?
The crucial takeaway here is that rational psychology, relying on pure reason alone, simply cannot give us knowledge of the soul's nature, its substantiality, simplicity, identity, or immortality as an object beyond experience. Reason chasing its own tail here merely sets impassable boundaries for speculative reason. We simply cannot know the soul's metaphysical nature through pure theoretical reason. Thinking we can is the first major illusion, the first paralogism.
Okay, so reason hits a wall trying to know the soul theoretically, but what happens when it tries to grasp something even bigger, not just the inner self, but the entire outer universe, the world as a complete whole? Here's where it gets really interesting, because you mentioned this earlier. This is where reason, left to its own devices, seems to get into direct, profound conflicts with itself. It produces seemingly watertight arguments for two completely contradictory claims about the cosmos. It's like watching reason have a debate with itself, and both sides seem to make perfect sense.
Indeed. This is arguably the most dramatic part of the dialectic, the antinomies of pure reason. These deal with rational cosmology, reason's attempt to grasp the world as a totality. Here, reason, driven by that relentless demand for the unconditioned, for the complete series of conditions for any given conditioned thing, like an event in the world, inevitably generates pairs of contradictory yet seemingly equally valid, equally provable assertions about the world considered as a whole. Kant meticulously identifies four such antinomies, four fundamental contradictions reason falls into.
Four unavoidable contradictions. What are they?
He divides them into two groups. The first two are the mathematical antinomies, dealing with the quantitative synthesis of appearances, adding things up in space and time. The first antinomy concerns the world's beginning in time and its limit in space. The thesis argues, the world must have a beginning in time and must be limited in space. The proof for the time part, for example, goes something like this. If the world had no beginning, then an infinite series of past moments or states would have elapsed up to the present moment. But an infinite series, by definition, cannot be completed through successive synthesis, counting one moment after another. Therefore, an infinite past is impossible, so the world must have had a beginning. The antithesis argues, with seemingly equal force. The world can have no beginning in time and no boundaries in space. It must be infinite in both regards. The counter-argument for time says, if the world had a beginning, then there must have been empty time before it began. But what is empty time? How could anything begin to exist in emptiness where there was no prior condition or cause? That seems absurd. So the world must be infinite in past time. Similar arguments apply to space.
Wow, both sides sound plausible. How can the world both have a beginning and not have a beginning? That's a flat contradiction.
Exactly. That's the antinomy. Reason proves both. The second antinomy grapples with simplicity versus infinite divisibility of substance. The thesis claims, every composite substance in the world consists of simple parts, and nothing exists anywhere but the simple or what is composed of it. The argument is that if you keep dividing a composite thing, you must eventually reach parts that are not composite, otherwise composition itself would have no ground. These ultimate parts must be simple. The antithesis counters. No composite thing in the world consists of simple parts, and there nowhere exists in the world anything simple. The argument here is that anything occupying space must have parts outside of parts, and thus be divisible. And since space itself is infinitely divisible, anything in space must also be infinitely divisible. So, you never reach truly simple parts.
Again, a direct contradiction. Either things are ultimately simple, or they're infinitely complex. Reason seems to prove both.
Exactly. Now, the next two are the dynamical antinomies. These concern not just adding up parts, but the causal connections and existence of things. The third antinomy addresses the absolutely crucial question of freedom versus universal natural causality. The thesis argues, causality according to the laws of nature is not the only causality from which the appearances of the world can one and all be derived. To explain these appearances, it is necessary to assume that there is also another causality, that of freedom. The argument is that natural causality implies every event is determined by a preceding state. If this goes back infinitely, we never get a first cause, a complete explanation. Therefore, there must be a power of spontaneously beginning a state, an uncaused cause freedom at least to initiate the whole series, or perhaps even within the series, like human free will. This seems necessary for morality and responsibility. The antithesis argues, there is no freedom, but everything in the world happens solely according to laws of nature. The counter-argument insists that assuming a free cause, one not determined by prior causes according to laws, would break the unity and coherence of experience. Nature is a system of universal laws. Introducing uncaused causes would make science impossible and reality chaotic. Every event must have a determining natural cause.
This one feels particularly relevant. Science seems to point to determinism, but our feeling of being free agents, our moral sense, seems to demand freedom. Kant is saying reason itself generates this conflict.
Yes, reason itself produces compelling arguments for both sides. Finally, the fourth antinomy questions the existence of an absolutely necessary being. The thesis asserts, there belongs to the world, either as its part or as its cause, a being that is absolutely necessary. The argument from contingency. Everything contingent, that could be otherwise, must ultimately depend on something necessary for its existence. Since the world is full of contingent things, there must be an absolutely necessary being somewhere in the chain of conditions, either within the world or as its ultimate ground. The antithesis declares, an absolutely necessary being nowhere exists, either in the world or outside the world as its cause. The counter-argument suggests that a necessary being within the world would either have to be the whole infinite series, which can't be necessary, or a first cause in time, which violates the argument of the first antinomy's antithesis. And a necessary being outside the world as its cause is also problematic, as it seems to require initiating a temporal series from a non-temporal cause, which is hard to conceive. Everything seems contingent.
Good grief. So reason basically ties itself in knots over the biggest questions about the cosmos. Finite or infinite? Simple or complex? Freedom or determinism? Necessary being or just contingency?
That's a perfect summary. It generates these unavoidable contradictions when it tries to treat the world as a completed object knowable in itself. But now, the truly remarkable part, the profound aha moment, is Kant's critical solution to these antinomies. He doesn't just leave us with the contradictions.
How does he solve them? Does one side win?
Not exactly. His solution is incredibly subtle and relies entirely on the distinction between phenomena and noumena he established earlier. He argues that for the mathematical antinomies, the first two, about the world's size and divisibility, the conflict arises from a fundamental mistake. Both the thesis and the antithesis are actually false,
Both are false.
because they both make the same underlying error. They treat appearances, phenomena, the world as it appears to us within space and time, as if they were things in themselves, noumena, existing independently of our minds. When we talk about the world in these antinomies, its total size, its ultimate parts, we're actually talking about the sum total of possible appearances. But this sum total is never given to us as a completed whole. It's an indefinite series that we synthesize progressively.
So asking if the appearance world is finite or infinite in itself is like asking a nonsensical question.
Exactly. It's a false dilemma. It's like asking if the series of numbers is finite or infinite as a thing. It's neither. It's an endless potential progression. Similarly, the world of appearances is neither finite nor infinite in itself because appearance is nothing existing in itself. The series of conditions just goes on indefinitely as long as we keep tracing it back or forward through experience or synthesis. And the division of an appearance goes on indefinitely. There's no absolute limit or ultimate simple part within the realm of appearance. So both sides of the mathematical antinomies, assuming the world as appearance is a thing in itself with a fixed size or ultimate parts, are wrong.
Okay, that's a clever way out for the first two. What about the dynamical ones? Freedom versus determinism, necessary being versus contingency. Are both sides false there too?
No. And this is where the solution gets even more interesting and consequential. For the dynamical antinomies, the third and fourth, Kant argues that it's possible for both the thesis and the antithesis to be true, but in different respects, referring to different realms.
Both can be true. How? Freedom and determinism.
Yes, potentially. Here's how. In the world of sense, the realm of phenomena, the empirical world we experience and study through science, everything is indeed empirically conditioned according to the laws of nature, as the antithesis claims. There is no uncaused beginning of a causal series within that empirical realm. Every event has a prior determining empirical cause. Determinism holds for appearances.
Okay, so science is right about the phenomenal world being determined.
But, Kant argues, this doesn't preclude the possibility of a non-empirical intelligible cause operating from the realm of noumena, things themselves. This intelligible cause wouldn't be part of the temporal series of appearances, but could be its ground.
An intelligible cause.
Okay.
What?
Like human freedom. A human action, when viewed as an appearance in space and time, is fully determined by prior natural causes, biological factors, psychological motives, social conditioning, etc. Science can study these exhaustively. However, Kant argues that same action might also be considered as originating from the subject considered as a noumenon, as a thing in itself, possessing an intelligible character, capable of spontaneously initiating a causal series from outside the temporal chain of nature.
Yeah, so my action is determined as an appearance, but free as originating from my true self.
That's the idea. The intelligible ground, freedom, does not touch the empirical questions at all. It operates on a different level. This brilliant move means that morality, which Kant deeply believed absolutely presupposes genuine freedom and responsibility, isn't undermined or contradicted by the deterministic picture painted by natural science. They can coexist because they refer to different aspects of reality, the phenomenal determined and the noumenal potentially free.
That's huge. It saves both science and morality.
It's a cornerstone of his philosophy. And a similar solution applies to the fourth antinomy. In the world of sense, all appearances are contingent, as the antithesis claims. There's no absolutely necessary being within the empirical series. But this doesn't rule out the possibility of a non-empirical intelligible condition for the entire series of contingent appearances, an unconditionally necessary being like God existing outside the world of sense as its ultimate ground, as the thesis suggests. Again, both could be true in different respects.
So the antinomies aren't just intellectual puzzles. Solving them opens the door for things like freedom and maybe even God without contradicting science.
Precisely. By showing the limits of theoretical reason and distinguishing phenomena from noumena, Kant resolves the contradictions and makes conceptual space for key ideas needed for morality and religion, even if they remain unknowable theoretically. And this leads us directly to the final target of the dialectic, the ideal of pure reason. This section deals explicitly with rational theology, reason's inevitable attempt to conceive of and prove the existence of God.
The ultimate unconditioned ground.
Exactly. Reason, in its relentless drive for completeness, naturally forms the concept of a being that is the sum total of all possible perfections, the ground of all reality. Kant calls this the transcendental ideal, the concept of an ens realissimum, a most real being. This ideal functions as an original image, a prototypon, a standard against which all finite things are measured, conceived as deriving their reality from it. It's the concept of a perfect, supreme, original being.
It seems natural for reason to strive for such an ultimate concept.
It does. But the problem arises when reason tries to prove that such a being actually exists based on pure concepts alone. Here, Kant launches his truly devastating and historically crucial critique against the three main traditional philosophical proofs for God's existence.
Okay, the famous proofs. Which ones does he tackle?
He argues they all ultimately fail, and they even depend on each other in a problematic way. First, the ontological argument. This is the argument most famously associated with Anselm and Descartes, that tries to prove God's existence directly from the concept of God as a supremely perfect being. The idea is that existence is a perfection, so a supremely perfect being must necessarily possess the perfection of existence. Therefore, God must exist.
Just thinking about God proves God exists seems a bit too easy.
Kant agrees. He argues it falls into a miserable tautology. The core mistake, he famously asserts, is treating existence as if it were a real predicate, a property or quality that can be added to the concept of a thing, like omniscient or omnipotent. But exists, Kant says, isn't a property of the subject. It merely posits the subject itself with all its properties as being actual. Adding exists to the concept of God doesn't add anything to the concept. It just states that the concept is instantiated in reality.
So saying God exists isn't describing God, it's just saying there is a God.
Exactly. He uses the famous example of 100 thalers, coins. The concept of 100 possible thalers contains exactly the same conceptual content as the concept of 100 actual thalers. The actuality adds nothing to the concept itself. It just means the concept has an object corresponding to it in reality. You can't define something into existence just by including existence in its definition. The ontological argument makes this illicit leap from concept to reality.
Okay, so that one's out. What about the next?
Second, the cosmological argument. This argument starts from experience specifically, the experience of contingent existence, things that exist but could possibly not exist, like ourselves or the world around us. It argues that contingent beings require a cause, and tracing the chain of causes back must lead to an absolutely necessary being as the ultimate ground or first cause of everything.
That sounds more grounded. Starting from experience, what's wrong with it?
Kant argues that while it starts from experience, the fact of contingency, it quickly abandons experience. To get from something contingent exists to an absolutely necessary being exists, it uses causal principles. But then, crucially, to figure out the nature of this necessary being, to identify it as the ens realissimum, the most perfect being it has, to rely on purely conceptual analysis, arguing that only a being containing all reality could be truly necessary. And that, Kant says, secretly relies on the core idea of the ontological argument, that the concept of the most real being implies necessary existence. So the cosmological argument pretends to be empirical, but ultimately leans on the flawed ontological argument to reach its conclusion about God. It's parasitic on the first proof.
It smuggles the ontological argument in the back door. Clever critique. What's the third proof?
Third, the physico-theological argument, which we often call the argument from design. This is probably the most popular and intuitive argument. It looks at the order, beauty, complexity, and apparent purposiveness in the natural world, the intricate design of organisms, the regularities of the cosmos, and infers that this must be the product of an intelligent, wise, powerful designer or author, much like finding a watch on the beach implies a watchmaker.
That one seems quite compelling empirically.
Kant agrees it's the oldest, clearest, and most accordant with the common reason of mankind. He respects its empirical basis and its power to elevate the mind. However, he argues, even this proof has limitations as a strict demonstration. At best, he contends, it can prove the existence of an architect of the world, who works with existing matter, demonstrating great but perhaps not infinite wisdom and power. It cannot, on its own, prove the existence of an absolute creator of the world out of nothing, nor can it establish that this designer is the ens realissimum, the absolute perfect and necessary being with all possible perfections. To get that far, Kant argues, the argument from design also eventually has to fall back on the cosmological argument to get to a necessary being, and thus indirectly on the ontological argument, to identify that necessary being as the most real being.
So all roads lead back to the flawed ontological argument.
In Kant's analysis, yes. All attempts by speculative reason to prove God's existence theoretically ultimately fail. because they either misuse the concept of existence or illegitimately leap from the empirical to the purely conceptual and transcendental. The profound takeaway from this entire critique of rational theology for you, the listener, is stark. Pure reason in its speculative theoretical use simply cannot know God's existence. It cannot demonstrate it, nor, importantly, can it disprove it. Questions about God's existence fall entirely outside the boundaries of possible theoretical knowledge. This imposes a strict and, for many, humbling limit on what speculative reason can achieve, decisively confining its knowledge claims to the realm of possible experience, the phenomenal world we encountered in the analytic.
That is quite a conclusion for speculative reason, isn't it? After building up this incredible machinery of the mind, it seems like Kant uses the dialectic to show its ultimate limitations on the biggest questions. If theoretical reason can't give us certain knowledge of the soul as a simple immortal substance, or the world as a unified finite or infinite whole, or even God, then what can it do? Is it just left chasing these dazzling illusions and getting tangled in contradictions? What then is the legitimate positive role for reason in Kant's philosophy, especially these transcendental ideas like God, freedom, and immortality? Do they have any value at all?
This is precisely where Kant executes one of his most brilliant and consequential pivots in the whole critique.
Yeah.
He doesn't leave reason completely neutered or useless after exposing its speculative failures. He explains that while these transcendental ideas, soul, world, whole, God, when taken as constitutive principles, meaning when treated as if they actually describe objects and give us direct knowledge of how things are in themselves, inevitably lead to illusion and contradiction, they nevertheless have a good and purposive vocation as regulative principles.
Constitutive versus regulative. What's the difference?
A constitutive principle actually helps constitute or create an object of knowledge. The categories, when applied to intuitions, are constitutive. They make objective experience possible. But transcendental ideas can't do that because there's no intuition for them. Instead, as regulative principles, they serve not to create new knowledge of objects beyond experience, but rather to guide and direct the understanding in its empirical use within experience. They provide a kind of framework or ideal goal for organizing and unifying our existing knowledge, pushing it towards greater completeness and coherence.
Okay, so they don't give us answers about things beyond experience, but they help us organize the knowledge we do get from experience, like a compass for research.
That's an excellent way to put it. This regulative use of reason acts exactly like a compass or a set of guiding stars for scientific inquiry and understanding. These ideas prompt the understanding to seek systematic unity among its various cognitions. They push us to organize our knowledge as if it were derived from a single overarching principle or ground, even though we can never know that ground directly. They encourage us to look for connections, underlying laws, and greater coherence in the messy data of experience.
Can you give some examples of how these ideas work regulatively?
Sure. Think about the idea of the soul as a simple, unified substance. While we can't know it's true, thinking as if the mind were a unified whole encourages psychologists to look for unifying principles in mental life, rather than just seeing a bundle of disconnected states. Or consider the idea of the world as a totality. While we can't know the world as a whole, the idea pushes cosmologists and physicists to seek ever more comprehensive laws that unify disparate phenomena, to push the boundaries of inquiry further and further back in time or deeper into the structure of matter, always striving for a more complete picture, as if it were approaching a unified whole. Kant even mentions specific scientific maxims that function this way. For example, the principle of parsimony, entities are not to be multiplied without necessity, often called Occam's razor, reflects the idea of seeking underlying unity and simplicity. Conversely, the principle of specification, nature makes no leaps, encouraging us to look for intermediate species or gradations, reflects the idea of nature's maximal diversity and continuity, derived from the ideal of the ens realissimum, containing all possibilities. These aren't statements about how nature is absolutely. Rather, they are methodological principles, fruitful heuristic guides, that direct scientific investigation. They help us organize what we learn about phenomena.
So, for you, the listener, reason, even with its grand ideas, isn't useless. It encourages us to look for patterns, connections, simplicity, and completeness in our knowledge of the empirical world, even while acknowledging that proving this ultimate unity or simplicity absolutely is beyond our theoretical grasp. It's the engine pushing science forward.
Exactly. It's the ultimate seek and ye shall find. More connections and order within experience, driven by an ideal of perfect unity we can never actually reach theoretically. It keeps our understanding striving. But the most crucial shift, the move that truly reestablishes the profound significance of these transcendental ideas beyond just guiding science, is the turn to practical reason. This raises an important question, maybe the most important question for us as human beings. If theoretical reason can't give us certainty about these great metaphysical questions, freedom, God, immortality, what does that mean for our moral lives? For how we should live and act? Are they just unknowable, irrelevant concepts?
Yeah, if we can't know, why bother?
But Kant's answer is revolutionary. His central, profound statement here, one of the most famous lines in the Critique from the preface to the second edition, is this: I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith, or belief, globe.
Deny knowledge to make room for faith. What does that mean?
It means that precisely because theoretical reason fails to either prove or disprove the existence of God, the freedom of the will, or the immortality of the soul, it leaves open a space for these concepts to be grounded in a different way, not through theoretical proof, but through the undeniable demands of practical reason, that is, our moral consciousness. While theoretical reason hits a wall, our moral experience requires these ideas as necessary postulates of practical reason.
Postulates, like assumptions we have to make for morality to work.
Exactly. Necessary assumptions or presuppositions for the very possibility of morality as we experience it. Think about it. Our deep-seated sense of moral duty, the feeling that we ought to do certain things and not others, makes no sense unless we assume we are genuinely free to choose our actions. If we were just cogs in a deterministic machine, moral oughts would be meaningless. So freedom, though theoretically unknowable, must be postulated for morality to be possible. Furthermore, morality commands us to strive for the highest good, which for Kant involves both perfect virtue and happiness proportionate to that virtue. But clearly in this empirical life, virtue and happiness often don't align. The virtuous suffer, the wicked prosper. For the moral law's command to strive for the highest good to be rational, we must postulate a future life where this alignment can occur, hence the immortality of the soul. And finally, for this ultimate justice, this proportioning of happiness to virtue, to be guaranteed, we must postulate the existence of a being who is both the author of the moral law and has the power to arrange the world accordingly, hence the existence of God.
So we can't prove freedom, immortality, or God theoretically, but we must assume them practically based on the demands of morality itself.
That's Kant's ingenious move. The majestic ideas of morality, he says, while admirable, are not strong enough incentives for resolve and realization on their own, unless they connect with an efficient cause, God, that can ultimately bring about the highest good, which requires freedom and immortality. For you, the listener, this is the magnificent reestablishment of the importance of these fundamental moral and religious beliefs. It gives them a secure, rational footing, not in the shaky, contradictory ground of speculative metaphysics, but in the undeniable universal demands of our own moral consciousness. It shows that some of the most important truths are not merely observed or proven theoretically, but must be lived and believed for our practical moral lives to make sense. Reason's limits in one area become the foundation for its authority in another.
That's a powerful and honestly deeply satisfying reconciliation, isn't it? Between what we can strictly know through science and observation and what we feel we must believe or assume for morality to have meaning. It shows reason's true strength lies not in trying to overreach its grasp into the unknowable, but in carefully understanding its own proper domain, its true internal architecture, and its different functions, theoretical and practical. This really brings us to the Critique's broader, almost meta-philosophical impact. It wasn't just doing philosophy, it was reflecting on how philosophy should be done. How did Kant see philosophy's own method comparing to other successful disciplines, especially mathematics? He clearly admired the certainty of math. Did he think philosophy should just copy it?
That's a fantastic question, because Kant was remarkably clear, and actually quite firm, that philosophy cannot simply imitate the mathematical method, despite his admiration for math success. This is a crucial distinction for understanding philosophy's unique role and its own specific kind of rigor. He outlines several key differences. First, definitions. Mathematics, Kant explains, can define its concepts with absolute precision because it constructs its objects in pure intuition. A geometer defines a circle as all points equidistant from a center, and then can actually construct that figure mentally or on paper, perfectly matching the definition. The definition creates the object, in a sense.
Right, the definition tells you exactly how to make one.
Exactly. Philosophy, however, usually deals with concepts that are given, either empirically, like water, or a priori, like substance or cause. Philosophy analyzes these given concepts. It doesn't construct their objects from scratch and intuition. So we can't define something as complex and contested as, say, justice or knowledge with the same kind of generative precision as defining a triangle. Philosophical attempts at definition, Kant suggests, are often more like expositions or analyses, clarifying and refining a concept we already have, drawing out its components rather than the truly constructive, stipulative definitions found in mathematics. Trying to start philosophy with definitions like Euclid starts geometry is a mistake.
Okay, so definitions work differently. What else?
Second, axioms. Mathematics famously relies on axioms, those fundamental self-evident truths that are accepted without proof, like the whole is greater than the part, or things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. They form the bedrock upon which mathematical reasoning builds. Philosophy, Kant asserts forcefully, has no axioms in this sense.
No self-evident starting points for philosophy.
None that can be based on pure concepts alone. Any principle in philosophy, especially a fundamental a priori one, like the principle of causality, cannot just be asserted as obvious. It must rigorously justify its authority and legitimacy through what Kant calls a thorough deduction, a painstaking demonstration of how that principle applies necessarily to objects of experience. The entire transcendental analytics section of the Critique, deriving and justifying the categories, is such a deduction. Philosophy has to earn its first principles. It can't just assume them like math does with axioms based on intuition.
That makes philosophy sound much harder.
It has a different kind of challenge, definitely. And third, demonstrations. Mathematics thrives on demonstrations, logical proofs that are not only apodictic, yielding necessary certainty, but are also intuitive. When a mathematician proves a theorem, you can often see the truth unfolding in the diagram or the symbolic construction. The intuition guides the proof.
You follow the steps visually or spatially.
Right. Philosophical proofs, on the other hand, Kant calls achromatic discursive proofs. They work primarily with abstract concepts, in abstracto, proceeding logically from one concept to another, rather than through constructing things in intuition. While they can achieve the same level of apodictic certainty as mathematical proofs, they don't offer that same kind of immediate, intuitive self-evidence. The certainty comes purely from the conceptual connections. In philosophy, Kant notes, every false step becomes visible through careful conceptual analysis and logical scrutiny, but it's not like visualizing a geometric proof failing. You have to follow the abstract argument carefully.
So philosophy's proofs are more purely conceptual, less visual or intuitive.
Generally speaking, yes. The crucial takeaway here, for you, the listener, thinking about what philosophy is that philosophy must understand and embrace its own unique method and its inherent limitations. It shouldn't suffer from math envy and try to awkwardly force itself into the mold of mathematics by starting with definitions and axioms it can't justify, or expecting intuitive demonstrations it can't provide. It has its own distinct kind of discursive conceptual rigor, focused on analysis, deduction, and critique.
That's a vital clarification. It really sets philosophy on its own unique, demanding path, rather than making it seem like a less successful version of mathematics. And speaking of paths, Kant was also keenly aware of the philosophical dead ends and pitfalls common in his era. He saw philosophy constantly swinging between extremes. How does his own critical approach position itself against those other dominant philosophical stances, particularly dogmatism and skepticism, which seem to be the two main perpetually warring options before him?
Yes, the Critique is fundamentally positioned as a revolutionary third way, a desperately needed corrective to the endless unproductive oscillation between dogmatism and skepticism. Dogmatism, as Kant uses the term, isn't just about being stubborn. It refers to any philosophical approach that proceeds without a prior, rigorous critique of reason's own powers and limits. The dogmatist simply assumes that pure reason, armed with logic and concepts alone, can directly discover profound truths about things in themselves, about the ultimate nature of the soul, the cosmos, God. Think of rationalist metaphysicians like Leibniz or Wolff. This approach, Kant argues, while often bold and systematic, inevitably leads to obscurity and contradictions like the antinomies we discuss, because it confidently oversteps the legitimate boundaries of human knowledge, venturing unwisely into that stormy ocean, the true seat of illusion. It tries to build a grand metaphysical skyscraper without first testing the foundations or examining the very tools and materials available for the job. It lacks self-awareness.
So dogmatism is building without checking the blueprints or the tools first. What about skepticism?
Skepticism, represented perhaps most powerfully in Kant's time by David Hume, appears as the opposite reaction. But Kant sees it as ultimately equally unhelpful, though perhaps useful temporarily. Skepticism incites reason against itself, relentlessly pointing out the failures, contradictions, and unresolved debates within dogmatic metaphysics. It highlights reason's inability to provide conclusive proofs for its grandest claims. This often leads to paralyzing doubt and a recommendation of simply suspending judgment, or embracing ignorance about ultimate questions.
Skepticism just throws up its hands.
Essentially, yes. Now, Kant acknowledges that skepticism can serve a useful temporary purpose. It acts as a taskmaster for a healthy critique, waking reason from its dogmatic slumber and forcing it to examine its own foundations more carefully. However, skepticism doesn't offer a positive solution itself. It merely leaves the doubt standing, tears down existing structures without building anything enduring or secure in their place. It's merely preparatory, Kant says. It can't resolve the fundamental conflicts of reason. It just highlights them and then recommends we stop trying.
So dogmatism builds on sand, and skepticism just points out the sand and walks away. What's Kant's alternative?
Kant's own approach, which he calls criticism or the critical method, is presented as the only path to achieving enduring philosophical tranquility and putting metaphysics on the secure path of a science. Criticism involves a thorough, systematic, impartial self-examination of reason, performed by reason itself, on reason itself. Its primary goal is to precisely determine reason's domain and boundaries, to map out exactly what reason can and cannot achieve a priori, independently of experience.
So it's about understanding the tool before using it.
Exactly. By rigorously mapping the territory of pure reason, identifying the forms of sensibility, space, time, the categories of understanding, their legitimate application via schemata only within experience, and the inevitable illusions reason falls into when it transgresses these limits, criticism achieves two crucial things simultaneously. First, it establishes the possibility and legitimacy of secure a priori knowledge, like math and the basic principles of science within the realm of possible experience. Second, it decisively prevents reason from diluting itself with supposed insights beyond experience, thereby dissolving the contradictions like the antinomies that fueled skepticism.
It secures knowledge where it's possible and prevents illusions where it's not.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the critical approach isn't just some abstract academic exercise for Kant. It has profound practical implications. He explicitly states that his critique aims to sever the very root of materialism, fatalism, atheism, of free-thinking unbelief, of enthusiasm and superstition, which can become generally injurious, and finally also of idealism and skepticism, which threaten the foundations of knowledge and morality.
Wow, that's a bold claim. How does understanding cognitive limits combat all those things?
By showing, for example, that materialism, which claims only matter exists, and fatalism, determinism denying freedom, are dogmatic overextensions of concepts, valid only within the empirical realm. By showing that theoretical reason can neither prove nor disprove God's existence, it cuts the ground from under both dogmatic atheism and superstitious enthusiasm. By refuting subjective idealism and corrosive skepticism, it secures the reality of the empirical world and the possibility of objective knowledge within it. By truly understanding our own cognitive structures and their inherent limits, we can avoid the philosophical errors that lead either to unfounded dogmatic assertions about ultimate reality or to paralyzing, unproductive doubt about everything. Criticism, for Kant, provides a stable, secure ground for both scientific inquiry and moral action, showing that they operate legitimately within their proper spheres, finally free from the endless, fruitless, and often harmful quarrels of speculative metaphysics run wild. It empowers us by showing us what we truly can know and what we must accept through faith grounded in practical reason. It's philosophy finally coming to understand itself. #outro.
What an absolutely extraordinary journey we've taken today. Seriously. From those fundamental building blocks of our own cognition, the innate structures of space, time, the categories of understanding, all the way to the grand, compelling, but ultimately illusory ideas that reason creates when it tries to reach beyond experience. We've really navigated the profound and revolutionary insights of Kant's critique of pure reason.
It's a workout for the mind, that's for sure.
Definitely. It's truly a monumental work. And what strikes me is how, even while it seems to deny us knowledge in those really big speculative realms, like definitively proving God's existence or the simple immortal nature of the soul, theoretically, it simultaneously, and maybe more importantly, secures the foundations for both rigorous science and objective morality within their own proper spheres.
That balance is key. Limiting reason in one area to make it secure in others.
Yeah. For me, the core philosophical insight that just keeps resonating is that active, undeniable role of our own minds, our sensibility with its forms, our understanding with its categories, in fundamentally shaping our very experience of reality. It's not just passively received from out there. A significant structural part of how we experience the world is fundamentally interior, built into our own cognitive architecture. So after all that, what does this all mean for us? For you, the listener, as you go about your day experiencing the world? Does it change anything?
Well, I think this deep dive has hopefully revealed that far from diminishing our understanding or trapping us in subjectivity, recognizing the inherent limits and the profound underlying structures of our own reason is, in Kant's view, the only way to establish truly secure and meaningful knowledge. His whole project, what could be called a kind of transcendental physiology, exploring the a priori conditions that make both our experience of bodies in space, corporeal nature, and our own thinking nature possible, laid the groundwork for understanding how we actively construct our world of experience rather than just passively mirroring it.
It gives us a kind of blueprint for our own knowing.
Exactly. It shows that our minds are not these blank slates just waiting for the world to write on them. They come equipped with this powerful universal structuring, equipment, space, time, categories that makes objective experience, and therefore objective knowledge of that experience, possible for all of us. We all share this fundamental cognitive constitution. And crucially, this profound insight extends far beyond just theoretical knowledge of the natural world. By systematically demonstrating the limits of speculative reason, showing it cannot definitively prove or disprove freedom, immortality, or God can't, brilliantly cleared the intellectual ground. He made space, as he said, for their necessary acceptance, their postulation, through practical moral reason. It's the ultimate recognition of our complete rational nature, both theoretical and practical.
Limits creating possibilities.
Precisely. And this leaves us, I think, with a truly provocative thought for you, the listener, to really mull over long after this conversation ends. How does acknowledging these deep inherent mental structures, these a priori conditions, these glasses that your mind inevitably brings to every single experience, how does that change your perception of reality itself? Does a world seem less solid, or perhaps more intimately connected to your own consciousness?
That's a deep question.
And perhaps even more importantly, how does understanding these limits and structures shape your view of your own moral responsibilities? Does grounding things like freedom and moral law, not in some abstract, unprovable theoretical proposition about things in themselves, but in the very fabric of your own rational, acting, practical being, does that make morality feel more urgent, more real, more fundamentally human? How does knowing the map of your reason affect how you navigate your life?
Powerful, foundational questions indeed. Questions to carry with us. Well, that's all the time we have for this particular deep dive. Thank you so much for guiding us through that.
My pleasure. It's always stimulating to revisit Kant.
And thank you for joining us on this challenging but hopefully rewarding intellectual adventure into the mind of Kant and the very nature of reason itself. We encourage you, as always, to continue your own deep dives into the boundless world of ideas.